I'd like to welcome everyone to our program on the past, stories from the past. And this is part of an ongoing series that we've had for our museum. We're trying to catch the stories of the people who have lived here from the 50s forward. And, you know, none of us are getting any younger. And so I want to capture those stories while we're all still here. Many of us are in our 70s and 80s now, some in our 90s. So we want to be able to capture that history. My name is Pat Barch. I'm not only Hoffman Estates historian, but I'm also a member of our Hoffman Estates Museum. I'm the curator. So I've put out things on the table for you to look at. Some of them are very old, dating back to 1955. We have some maps that are very interesting. One that I found was a map for the Gulf Rose Center. It's now the Gulf Center. But back when it was built, it was the Gulf Rose Shopping Center. And you'll see those plans on that table over there. There's another map that was given out by the local dairy. And that showed all of the streets and some of the important places where the churches were. And I find that a very interesting map also. So take a few minutes and look at the things that we have on the tables. We have collages of photographs that were compiled for the 50th anniversary. Those are on the back tables. And I believe that's the table that has one of the original telephone books. During our program, please raise your hand, question and answer all the way through. Because as our panel is talking, you may have questions. And let me introduce our panel to you. Ken Rogner. Ken is at the very end. Ken Rogner had the Shell station on the corner of Roselle Road and Higgins. And he's got stories. He's got stories, and I've warned him he really shouldn't tell tales out of school. But Ken, you know, he was like the local barber. I mean, everyone told him everything. And then our next panelist here is Fred Luft. Fred is the youngest, oldest member on our panel. By youngest, oldest, I mean he moved here when he was 4 years old, Fred, and is still living here in Parcel A. And then we have Jane Davey. Now, Jane Davey is not the youngest, oldest. She may fall into some of the older of us that are here.
The oldest.
I didn't want to say that. But so all right, Jane, you said it. You are the oldest of the oldest. And Jane and her husband Charlie moved into Parcel A in late 55 or 56?
May of 1956. May 1st, 1956. 60 years ago.
Yeah, 60 years ago. Amazing. And Ed Frank. And Ed Frank is getting to be one of the oldest. Ed and his wife Marcia live in Parcel C, and they moved in 1966. And Ed had been a trustee here on the village board. And so all of these people are going to tell their stories from the past. And I've lived here since 65. I have some good stories to tell too, but this isn't my day. I'm just going to be the moderator. So before we get into the questions for our panel, I just needed to congratulate the mayor and our trustees and all of the staff that work at the village and all of the people who live in Hoffman Estates, because Money Magazine chose Hoffman Estates as the 27th best place to live. Every year they choose the best 50 places in the United States to live, and Hoffman Estates came in number 27. And so that's wonderful. And it says Hoffman Estates was recognized for top-notch schools and diversity, as the population is over 20% Asian, about 14% Hispanic or Latino, and about 5% Black, the magazine said. And so it would be interesting to read all of those other aspects of the village that determine their choosing us as number 27. So wonderful. All right. Well, we've got stories. And the stories from the past. My first little story, just briefly before our panel starts with their stories. Over on this table, I believe, is the original incorporation papers for the Homeowners Association. And I think one of the things that has really inspired me and has made me so proud to live in Hoffman Estates is the fact that when all of these people moved here, you know, when Fred's family came out here, when Ken came out here, when Jane, all of us, but those in the very beginning, Jane was one of the first ones and Fred's parents, they formed a Homeowners Association. It was remarkable because I'm not sure the paint had dried on their houses yet. But in 1956, they set up the Hoffman Estates Homeowners Association. And in reading articles and papers that I've got up in the museum storage room, I kept hearing, or I kept reading about a district and a block and a district representative. And I didn't understand what that meant. And then finally, looking through papers that Mr. Howard Turpin had left, his wife gave those to the museum, I found the map. And the map is something that I will show here on my PowerPoint. And it showed parcel A, that's pretty much all that was built. And those people, they founded the Homeowners Association, divided up into districts and into blocks, elected a representative from each of those districts, and then they held meetings. And so that was the beginning of the governing of Hoffman Estates. The people didn't want to just let things go. They wanted to have a say in how the village developed. So this, what you see on the PowerPoint now, is the first map of Hoffman Estates. You can see Gulf Road and Higgins Road, and you can see parcel A, parcel B, and parcel C, and we still call it that today. It has never changed. So if you're new to the village and someone says, oh, I live in parcel B, and you don't know where that is, you'll have to ask them, say, what is that? So this was the first map. This was a map that was put together back in 56 and it was actually 57, I believe. It was in the front of the telephone book. And here is, oh, and that doesn't, the new residents started up their Homeowners Association. And these are those districts that I mentioned to you. And I don't know if we can see it very well, but you can see the numbers on the different blocks, and those were the districts. They had district, yeah, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I believe it went up to 18. And so each one of those blocks had their own representative, and then they had their elections and had their regular meetings. So this was the map that I found, and I was really so surprised because I had been reading about this and had no idea how this was done. This is the very beginning of parcel C. You can see everything has been set out. The homes have been built. But the Hammerstein farm, which was what Jack Hoffman purchased in order to begin building Hoffman Estates, that farm is still there. And it's very interesting to see how many barns they had. The Hammersteins, and especially Dorothy Dalton, Mr. Hammerstein's wife, she was a silent movie star, and she raised some of the best cattle, Black Angus, and some of the top-notch pigs. So there were a lot of barns there. And the house is kind of lost in the trees. And now the only thing that's left is the house, which is the Children's Advocacy Center. At one time, those barns were used for the first Homeowners Association. That was turned over to them by FNS, and they had all of their dances. And then there was a fire, and it burned most of those barns except one. And that one became the Boys Club. And that was there for many years, and eventually then that was torn down also. All right, now, Doris is not here, but this was going to be the picture that would prompt me to ask her about her early years in Hoffman Estates. Doris Provenzano has written a book, and it's in the Schaumburg Township District Library. I can't give you the title of it because I asked her to bring it with her. I thought, well, that would help me from having to look it up at the library card catalog. Well, the catalog, the computer one. But she's not here. And she was a war bride. She has a very interesting story to tell. Her husband, Tony, is 90 years old now. I think Doris is just a little bit younger. And when she moved to the United States, it was at the end of the war. She met her husband in England when he was in the Army. And I believe she was very young. I think she was only 17. And she married him. So she was a war bride, and when she came here to Hoffman Estates, she had 4 children, and this is most of them in the swimming pool. There's got to be an extra one. Maybe she had 5. It's possible. I thought she had 4. But she told such wonderful stories about the early days of Hoffman Estates, and there were kids everywhere, tons of kids. And she also mentioned when she came here, her mother had packed all of these nice, warm, wool tweed suits and skirts and sweaters. And she said when she came here, she was so surprised at how hot it was. And so she began to change her wardrobe because it was a little too warm in those itchy tweeds. Doris is, and her husband Tony are a remarkable couple because they're still going strong, doing their own thing, enjoying their home, still living in that first home that they moved into in 1956. Well, this is the Werner home in Parcel C in 1958. Now, the Werners are not here, but they donated quite a few pictures for me, and I'm hoping that you might be able to do the same. If you have old pictures from when you built your house, when the kids were growing up, things that you did, they are like treasures. So this one, you can see, I'm not sure that that street is paved. And there's no trees because, you know, it was all farmland. And so that was one of the first homes in Parcel C. And here, the first swimming pool that we had, the first public swimming pool, was the Lions Club. And this little clipping shows Mr. Vaccaro. He was instrumental in getting the Lions Club to build that pool. It was on Grand Canyon, and it's gone now. Now they have a little, one of those little water features that the kids can run under the water and have fun, but the pool is gone. And now I'm going to talk to Ken. Mr. Rogner, sir. This is the picture of the DC-3 that crashed into the home at 112 Arlington Street. It was on March 8th. This was probably, out of all of the things that have happened in the village, this was the most horrific, and it's one of the things that's always remembered by those of us that have lived here many years. But this was 1964. So this plane crashed. The story tells us it was a group of skiers that were returning from a ski trip, and somehow they got confused with the lights. One story said that they thought that the lights on Higgins Road were runway lights, but there weren't any lights on Higgins Road. There still isn't. We still don't have lights on Higgins Road.
I can give you the inside story.
Yes, and that's why, thank you. Tell us about the plane crash.
Okay. Now, I at that time, I did belong to, it was in the 60s, middle 60s, something like that. And I was a member of the volunteer fire department, really only because they had solicited and they said they needed people during the day. Well, with the gas station right there, it was convenient for me to answer the calls. So now we move ahead to a Sunday night, if I remember correctly, when the fire department alarm went off at home. And how they did that is if you were a member and they were going to call, you got a constant ring. So that meant, I mean, it wasn't one of those things that rings for 30 seconds, 10 seconds, it just keeps ringing until you pick it up. So at any rate, the call came, and it's something as innocent as an electrical failure at the school that was on Arizona Boulevard. I don't remember what school that. Fairview School. Thank you. My sons are laughing because I think he went to school there. So we got called for a power failure or something at Fairview. So the routine, of course, was to get a pumper, get the proper equipment, and see what's there. So you're equipped. We got on Arizona about halfway to the school, and they rescinded the call, and it came over the radio system that an airplane was down at such and such, whatever that address was. An aeroplane? Well, we continued there. And what did we discover? On the back of the house, on the rear end of the house, not the street side, was where this aeroplane ended up stopping after it crashed into the house, of course. And the people, I'd say of all the people that were in that aeroplane, there probably wasn't a sober one in the bunch, including the pilot. Okay. Now, you mentioned the lights. Okay. There was a model home that was in that area, and what FNS used to do, the construction company used to do, is they would illuminate the roadway from Higgins going up to the model, or models as the case may be. Well, these people were coming back from their wild weekend, and the pilot thought the lights that were along the driveway from Higgins up to the home was the runway he was looking for. So he attempted to land the plane, and of course the plane ended up crashing into the house and so on. I don't believe there was any fatalities on there.
I thought it was the co-pilot that died.
I thank you for the correction.
Yes, that died.
Yeah. Well, anyway, Carl Selke, who was the fire chief at the time, he said, Ken, he says, can you get us a truck with a winch? Well, yeah, sure. So I went to the gas station and I got a tow truck, the heavy duty one, and we're going to pull the airplane. I tried to get in at Berkeley Street, which was open all the way to Roselle at that time.
You see the picture behind you there?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
Yes.
there you go.
Yeah, and by that time, the authorities from O'Hare Field had gotten there, and those son of a guns were sitting at every entrance into the community to keep people out. So here I come with this truck. I'm trying to get into the area. They wouldn't let me. I have to go. The fire chief needs this. I believe he wanted to winch the truck or the airplane back because it was in contact with the house. Finally, a Hoffman policeman came by and told this person that I was authorized to go into that area. So it was almost like a comedy of errors, if you will. And then, of course, to top it off, then it was a number of days later when the one member of nobody in the airplane was injured. Most of them couldn't walk, but that's for other reasons, So the one member of the two pilots that were there ended up at Northwest Community Hospital. And he was there for about a week or so. And we just happened to have a meeting at the firehouse this one evening where he had been released. And he came to the firehouse and wanted to thank the guys for what they had done and so on and so forth. And he made the statement, and some things you remember all your life. He made the statement that, fellas, thanks very much, and I'll drop in to see you again sometime.
Yes.
And no, we don't want you to. But there was a lot of things happened, and we discussed something on the phone the other day that was the things that weren't publicized, and these, whether they be good, bad, or indifferent. Nobody knows that Roselle Road used to empty into the A section for drainage. But where did the water come from? That was the thing. How did it get there?
That was an interesting story he told me. You know, when you discover what's down under the ground from before they even started building the development. Yeah. So
what had happened was I got the okay from the oil company because the car wash had opened up on Gulf Road. We weren't washing cars anymore. I needed a third hoist. I had 2 car hoists. I needed a third one. So they agreed it could be done, and their man came out, who was, I was familiar with the man, and he was going to install the hoist in what we call the third bay. That would be the one closest to Roselle Road. But the base for the hoist has to go down like 10 feet so that posts can go up and down into the ground. He did it all by hand. And he got down to about the 10-foot mark. And he couldn't go any further. He was doing this thing by hand, trying to get these buckets of mud and so on. And his shovel or pick or whatever he was using kept hitting something. So he cleaned it all off. And it turned out to be a corrugated drainage pipe. What was assumed at that time then, it was the water that came off of Roselle Road, went into a manhole, and instead of, because they didn't have any other system, what they did is when that was still vacant land, they put the pipe just a couple of feet under the ground, and it went into the A section of Hoffman Estates. And of course, and then when the Shell Oil Company built it, they weren't going to have that depression like the shopping center had, because we were before the shopping center, of course. So they filled all that in. And so as a result, the gas station concrete inside the building was 10 feet above where it used to be, which was 10 feet down below, and the drain pipe is still there today, as far as I know. They could never put a building on it because they'd have to have footings and what have you, and the drain pipe is still there. This is something you don't read about in the newspaper.
and it's interesting, Ken, because the gas station, that piece of property there is higher than the rest of the Hoffman Plaza, and that's down below. And when we drive down Roselle Road, you can look down into that area, and so the gas station is a lot higher. Tell us what it was like trying to get out onto Higgins Road.
Oh yeah, that was a thing. It was I believe the month of July of what was my first year there, 59 I think it was, something like that. But I was still living in Chicago, northwest side of Chicago, and incidentally, as a sidebar, I would take Higgins Road to get out there because it was faster than the tollway, and it was only 2 lanes, and you really didn't stop for much of anything. So. What was I talking about?
Well, you had told us, because at that time there were no lights at Higgins and Roselle Road.
Yes, okay.
And there was only the stop sign on Roselle.
Yeah, Roselle stopped. Higgins didn't. And the one night I had to go back to Chicago, and I used to run the tow truck back and forth. And in those days, tow trucks had red gumball lights on the roof. They changed that law a couple of years later. Well, I couldn't get onto Higgins Road from the gas station. There was no center, wasn't any center divider then. It was a 2-lane road. I couldn't get out because there were so many cars going westbound on that weekend. So maybe it was a 4th of July weekend or some darn thing. So I figured, well, how am I going to get out of here? I went back to the gas station. I got back all the way up. And then I turned on all the warning lights I had on the truck. And when I got to my entrance, which was the east entrance to the station, the traffic stopped and let me out. No, we didn't even have police then, We had the county police, that was it.
That's right, we didn't have our own police.
No.
Yeah, it was Cook County Police that would come for problems at the time. Right. Oh, your stories. If we could probably sit all day and hear some of his other stories, but you were the one that went into the plane and turned off the engine.
I was?
I thought that was what you switched off some switches because they were worried about the something sparking the fuel that was leaking out of the engines. I've got the story wrong. Marilyn?
Jim Bolander, a United Airlines pilot that was on his way home. out here.
Oh, yes, Marilyn, thank you.
Yeah, and he climbed into the plane, turned it off.
Yes.
Because the fuel was leaking down into the house.
Yes, and he was, you had told me that story, and I'm thinking it was,
And he turned it all off because otherwise the whole building and everything would have exploded. As it was a split level house. So it only took out, I guess, the top part, and the people, I guess, were not, well, they were not harmed. Wherever they were in the house,
They were safe.
survived. Yeah.
Yeah, they were very lucky.
The name was Waymo. What's her name?
Levski. That was their name, the family who lived there.
The one daughter, right before the house went off, we just came down the stairs. She did not.
How lucky they were, right? I know that no one was hurt, in the family. And I'm looking at some of my notes here. The address was 112 Arlington Street. And the group was the Snowdrifters Club of Aurora. And I guess they were kind of drifting around after, they had been on the plane. But, they were passengers, so they were, enjoying beverages and whatever they needed to stay warm. But none of them were injured at all. So that was the name of the group. And it took 2 hours for the fire department to be able to, get everything taken care of, get the pilot, the co-pilot out. And so, yeah, the cockpit, it was buried pretty much in the garage area of the house, and that second, that you can see it's a split level. So, yeah, that was something that no one ever has forgotten.
The co-pilot's name was Daniel Jordan.
Daniel Jordan.
Marilyn Lind has been our historian previous to me and is still, she is with the Historic Sites Commission. If Marilyn doesn't know it, then no one knows it. And I really,
Marilyn is like Wikipedia.
yes, she truly is.
If
She
you want to
truly,
know something, you ask her. I have an addenda to that, to the
Yes.
airplane story. Very quickly. On that evening, we were entertaining our neighbors who, their name was McGee, and he was the owner of the Schaumburg Airport at that time. He had been the owner of the Elmhurst Airport, and he moved out to Schaumburg when we moved to Hoffman Estates, and he operated that airport. So Mac McGee was called immediately when the plane went down because he was an airport owner, pilot, mechanic, everything. So he and my husband went over to the site, and I stood in the back window because in those days there wasn't too many trees to block your view from one parcel to another, much less from one street to another, and watched the sky had some glowing in it from the plane, the flames. But my husband came home. Mac went home. He lived 2 doors away, and we all went to bed and forgot the whole story. Like in his life, it was not a big deal. He was kind of a Sully-Sullenberg pilot, Mac was. We flew with him often, and sometimes I was like, oh, I'm never going to make it home. I'm never going to make it home. But anyhow, my husband was part of that evening too, and he took it in stride like, well, I thought this is pretty extraordinary. He didn't, but that's the kind of guy he is. So.
was that the pilot that flew you over Parcel A when you took
Yes.
that picture?
Yes, that was
Yes,
Mac.
and I don't have the picture here with all of the things that I have out, but Jane had taken this wonderful picture of Parcel A, and what made it very special for me was that it had Neville's Corners was in the picture. Neville's Corners was right on it was on the northwest corner of Higgins and Roselle Road, and it collected milk, and the dairy farmers would bring their milk there, and so I there was no pictures. I had never seen a picture of it, and so just being able to see that from this aerial shot. So when I say that your pictures are invaluable, I mean, they truly are. You might have been You might have been to a roller skating party and took a picture out in front with the kids. See, that would be so special. We have we do have a picture of the Fireside roller rink, and we do have a picture of the movie theater, the Thunderbird movie theater, but not any pictures of people standing out in front of it. So all of those pictures are really very special. All right, let's move on. Does anyone recognize this picture? All right, what is that house? That's the Vogelei house. Yes, and the Vogelei house with that very big Park District sign out in front now is used for, I believe there's someone that rents the house, and then the barn is used for the teen club, and you can rent that barn if you wanted to have a big party or a wedding or any kind of functions there. And the Park District pretty much saved that house. It was with a grant from one of the people that was either a representative to our state or was she state senator, who was able to give money to the Park District to help renovate that building. So thank goodness it's still there. It is a very special house. And you know, Ed Frank has some stories about this house. And can you see the house behind you on the screen there? Ed, this is your picture now. This prompts you to tell me the stories about the Vogelei house and Mrs. Vogelei.
Mrs. Vogelei was indeed a special character. She didn't like anybody on the park board, with the exception of me. And she wouldn't even talk to them. And of course, I was on the park board at the time, and we did want that piece of property. Well, and I used to go up and visit her quite often because she lived alone. And one day she said to me, "Well, where's your wife?" I said, "She's at a meeting." And I mentioned the name of the group that she went to. And she said, "Oh." And we talked a bit. I went home. A couple hours later, a car pulls up in front of my house, and in it is Ida Vogelei. And she looks, she said, "I thought you were a Catholic." I said, "Well, I am." She said, "Well, your wife doesn't belong to a Catholic organization." She said, "That's a Methodist group." I said, "Yes, my wife is a Methodist." She said, "Oh." Got into the car and went home. The next day, I went up to see her, and she said, "What are they going to do with this property if I sell it to them?" And I told them what it was, the Park District and everything. I said, "You know, Ida, if you, I know you, this has been in your family for a long, long time." I said, and I was on the park board at the time. I said, "You know, we'll keep the name of this and call it the Vogelei Park." And she said, "Yes, I'll sell it." And that's how we got Vogelei Park. But I can't recall why or who, but the front door on that building, she wanted it. It went to somebody, I believe, in her family. But it was the front door. She wanted the front door. I don't even recall what it looks like, but she wanted the door.
I know when you told me about that front door, you know, she wanted that named after herself. And so that farm must have been very special to her. Although, from what I understand, she bought it as an investment, that this would have been investment property for her. So, but, you know, she did want to have her name on it.
Yes, she did.
And that was what really sealed the deal then.
That's exactly what sealed the deal.
Yeah.
Because the property was very special to her.
Was she active in anything in the village at that time?
Absolutely not.
No, she didn't live out here either. Did she live on that
She
farm?
lived in that property, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she did live in that house.
How old was she when you were talking with her?
I have no idea.
I always thought she was an old lady even when she was young.
Well, she wasn't.
So she was up in years. Jane is asking how old.
She was older than I
she
was, obviously.
Yes. Okay. Right. It's a beautiful farmhouse, and I brought a few more details about it. The farmhouse,
There's a question over there.
a question, yes.
Really have a shotgun.
Did she have?
You know, I never heard about her.
Lived in the Highlands. Used to go onto the property. There was a swamp-like area between Jones Road and the back of the house. We'd catch frogs and tadpoles, etc.
You had fun there too.
Oh, God, yeah. The bottom line was that we knew she had a gun. We were told she had a gun, and when she heard that she was coming, and believe me, we never knew if she came outside, we'd take off.
You see, my sons, I only live a block from that farmhouse. And my children grew up at that farm. Mrs. Vogelai was not there then. She had already sold the property to the Park District. But, I mean, my children loved climbing in the orchard trees and picking strawberries in the strawberry patch, and really enjoyed it. So it was wonderful that it did become a park, or we wouldn't have, you know, the house there and the barn. But originally, now the Sunderledge farmhouse, do you all know where the Sunderledge farmhouse is? Well, the Sunderledge farmhouse was one of the first pioneers who moved here back in probably the late 1840s, would you say, Marilyn? 1843. And the farmhouse was built in 1856. And the smokehouse that's there is on the National Register of Historic Places. Well, that family, the Sunderledge family, that property, the Vogelai property, they purchased that property, or they already owned it. It was Amanda and Ed Sunderledge. They purchased the land from Amanda's father, Frederick. And so the house was built in 1916. It's interesting, the cost to build a house back then was $5,500. And the story that I have here, it took them 6 months to build. It had 6 bedrooms, 4 upstairs and 2 downstairs. The first floor also had a living room, dining room, kitchen, and pantry. In those early days, it was unusual for a house to have electricity, but this house was supplied with electricity by 16 32-volt batteries and the added luxury of its own septic tank. The basement took 1 week to dig with the help of a team of horses and a scraper. And that's how they dug out that basement. So it's interesting. The property was later owned by Chester and Esther Christensen, and that was their grandson, I believe. And it's still here, and that's why it's wonderful. It is owned by the Park District. It's great that they were able to save it. And it can be used, the barn can be used for family functions, whatever you have going. Would be a great place to do something like that. Also, the village owns the Sunderledge farmhouse, and that is also available to the public to have parties or whatever you would like. Now I'm going to stop my pictures for a minute, and I'm going to ask these panelists, and I'm going to start out with, let's see, the youngest of the oldest. Fred, why did your family move here?
They wanted to get into a larger than living in Chicago on the far northeast side of Chicago on Hollywood Boulevard, and they wanted something to have a little bit of property and land. And they moved out to Hoffman Estates in September of 1957 to 162 Des Plaines Lane. And we were actually just a few houses away. We lived from Mr. Rogner here. And the house, they bought the house for $17,000. And it was a 25-year mortgage, $95 a month at 4 3/4%. And it was a lot of money back then. I mean, today you think, but $95 a month, but you look and see what people paid.
Gasoline was 30 cents a gallon.
Fred, The second question, now, this doesn't really apply to you because it says, did you have far to travel to work? And you were only 4 years old.
Right, but my dad worked in Chicago, and he drove, of course, I'm sure like Mr. Rogner mentioned, Higgins Road, which was the major road to get into Chicago.
What did your father do?
He was a estimator for a heating supply company, and then years later he went into estimating mechanical installation, and that's what I wound up going into, thanks to him. Did that for 40 years.
And then your father was, he was active in the government, the early government of Hoffman Estates.
Yes, 1961 he was elected as Schaumburg Township Auditor, and then in 1965 him and the other men that were in the organization ran again, but he lost. He lost by 7 votes.
Oh my.
But years later, he told me, I remember one time, first time I ever went out having a drink with my dad when it was legal to drink, he said, son, that was one of the best things that ever happened. But I lost.
And I have another question. This is something I have not been able to find an answer to. Maybe someday I'll find a map that has it on, but it's that street. If you are traveling down Illinois and you want to turn off and pull into the Children's Advocacy Center, there's a little street that goes in there, and it also
Whittle Drive
takes you,
it was called back then.
It was called Whittle Drive. I cannot prove this. I wish I had a picture with the sign up on the street. This early map that we have, it doesn't show that. I don't think it shows, we'll have to all look at that map that the dairy people made up and see. But I never knew that it had a name. And so I was going to ask our village clerk, Bev Romanoff, to look and see, was there ever a Whittle?
I know there was a street sign that was on the street because I was on the Hoffman Estates Police Auxiliary in the early 70s, and part of our assignment was St. Hubert's Church. People would leave St. Hubert's Church and come down to Illinois Boulevard. And there was a sign there, that street sign that said Illinois and Whittle.
See, so this is a little bit of trivia. You know, this is the stuff that drives historians crazy. We hear these stories, and yet we can't spread them around. No, I mean, I'm not spreading this around, right? I mean, you're going to keep this quiet. But, I mean, I've not been able to find a map, nothing that says, you know, Whittle. But when we do, Fred, we'll be happy.
I've been looking too for all sorts of stuff.
Yes, he saw it. And it's just like... recently, in the last 5 years, we had put up a historic sign for Jones Road, for John's Road, because it was John's Road, Jahn. The John family owned the farm there, and it was very nice. Bruce and his crew came out, and we videotaped that, and the John family was there, and they were just so happy that it finally did have, you know, that historic sign stating it was not Jones. And of course, from Jones, you can see how easily, or from John, you can see how easily that could have been written out somewhere, and the H wasn't high enough, the A wasn't very distinctive, and it became Jones.
I think what the problem is when it gets registered in Cook County, they don't know how to spell their name.
Well, we know from...
Wise Road.
Yes, we know from census records and all of that it really took someone with really beautiful, legible handwriting to be able to pass along the information accurately.
Well, if I may interject one item about Jones Road, I found in notes my dad had from 1959. We all know Illinois 53 is the expressway right by Woodfield.
Yes.
But according to, my dad's got something he typed up when, he says, one look at this map and anyone can see we are virtually surrounded by the village of Schaumburg. The only outlet is the Freed Farm, 1/4 mile wide, and this outlet will be cut off by the Jones Road Expressway scheduled to be built within the next few years.
You never knew, did you? They were going to put in an expressway along Jones Road. And I have that too. I've read that, and I believe I have in our files upstairs in the museum area a map with a drawing. And it was going to go from was it from Central? Were they going to come off of the toll?
Northwest Tollway was not built at that time.
No, that's right, because that went in 57. So I think it was from Central, and it was going to go all the way out to Wise Road.
Correct. It was going to go, right.
So you see the almost, what almost happened. Yeah, very interesting when you come across these things, and then you think, well, that never happened. So thank goodness, I think. Well, that's just like our forest preserve. You know, we're blessed with all of this between the parks and the forest preserves, 4,000 acres within our boundaries of the village. And I mean, there aren't any other villages that have that much open land. And, you know, if we would have had Leisure World, which was supposed to be developed many years ago, I mean, we wouldn't have all of that. And when that failed, the Metropolitan Sanitary District wanted to use it, and we would have had nice big sludge things. But they didn't get it, and so the Forest Preserve came in and, you know, condemned the land and took it over. And, I mean, thank goodness.
You just answered one of my questions that I was going to ask anybody about. In 1965, my dad was appointed by Mayor Pinger to be the chairman of the Hoffman Estates Merger Committee to talk with the Schaumburg Merger Committee. And they say that didn't come about.
No.
But one of the items in here, it says that they noted that there was annexation of the Leisure World acreage. And I had never heard of that.
Yeah, Leisure World was going to be a place for seniors, almost like, you know, Sun City. It was going to be for senior citizens. It would be almost a city unto itself. I forget how many people were going to live there. I don't know. Am I wrong to say 50,000?
I
Jane?
worked for Leisure World.
Oh, here we go.
I can't remember how I got the job, but they put up a trailer in the parking lot over at the Jewel at Golf and Higgins and Roselle, or Golf and Roselle, same thing. And somebody asked me if I would like to work part-time, and I decided that would be a good idea. And so I was installed in a trailer in the parking lot with a probably primitive film of some sort, and I showed this film to whoever stopped into the trailer about Walnut Hills, California, where Leisure World began. And it's a gorgeous place. If anyone's ever seen it, it's still there, and it's still full of old people. But that trailer and me were parked in that parking lot most of that summer before the whole enterprise went down the poop chute. I don't know why it failed, but I think I made about 35 cents an hour working for these people. And there weren't any other perks. There was no food because it was in a trailer. There wasn't even any facilities, so when I had to go to the bathroom, I had to go home. But I lived in Parcel A, so I was only 2 blocks away. But that was Leisure World for me. It came and went in a summer event. Yes. It was going to be built out on Gulf Road, west of Barrington Road, where the Forest Preserve is now. And they put up a building out there, a big, beautiful blue and white building. It looked like something, it was going to be their sales office. And I was all excited because I thought, oh, I'm moving into a building, out of a trailer and into a building. But it failed before that happened, and the building sat there empty for years until whatever went into it. I have no idea. But anyhow, Leisure World, I was all excited. I'd be living there now if it was here.
Something I didn't know about, Jane. That building is still there. If you drive down Gulf Road, you'll see it. It's if you're heading west, it'll be on your right-hand side. And it was for a while it was a newspaper distribution area where the local newspapers and the people that were going to deliver to the homes would go there. And I don't know what it's used for now. Yeah, it may just be a forest preserve building, that it belongs to them, but that never happened. So all of these and many things that never happened. Let me go on. I want to go to my next slide. And this is the Tropicana pool, and I'm going to let maybe all of these people talk. Jane, you said you never, did you belong?
No, I couldn't afford it.
Okay, and that's what I was going to give you some particulars on this. And Ed, I think you were one of the people that helped with the Tropicana pool.
Well, yeah.
And I'm just going to give some background on it. In November of 1959, a charter meeting was held, and 84 families began the Tropicana Swim Club. The land was at 680 Audubon, and it was donated by F&S Construction. And in the spring of 1960, the pool was under construction. It was 130 feet by 145 feet, and it would have a 20 by 60 foot adult pool, and then there was a bathhouse and refreshment area. Later, they did add tennis courts. It was limited to 150 families, or 200 originally, and then later it was reduced to 150, and the initiation fee was $150. And so that gave them, the use of the pool. And so now I'm going to turn this over to Ed, because he was instrumental in working with that.
Well, I don't know how instrumental I was with working in it, but we certainly used it a lot.
Oh, that's good.
During the summertime, we'd drop the boys off for the day, and we knew they were going to be safe. But it was really a social place. They used to have pig roasts and all kinds of parties, Halloween parties, everything. And the people who were members were very close with each other. Matter of fact, a group of us used to go down to Jamaica for a week. 4 couples would go down, and but that was one of the big social things in Hoffman Estates. It was a fantastic place to go. Fantastic people were there all the time, and we just loved it. We were sorry to see it go.
And it did close in 2007. The Tropicana pool, the fees, were going up. It was more costly to take care of, and the cost was $175 for a family to join, $100 for dues, and then over time, it got to the point where they could not maintain it. Not that many families were joining. Yes.
I'd just like to add to the Tropicana. I was a member too, also for many years, and I lived right behind it in one of those model homes, and we had a big deck, and it was wonderful. I always knew where my daughter was. It was always embarrassed her again, but as I go out the deck, I could see the pool, and if I would stretch my neck, I could see the tennis court. And children gathered there. Even if they weren't members, they hung around outside. So
You always knew where they were, and you never worried.
But then there were always kids gathering there, even not that were members also, because they'd sit on lawns and in the boulevard, and it was just a wonderful place for me and my family. I don't remember enjoying all the social activities you did, but the little family, it was wonderful.
I guess, the people really
wasn't
did enjoy it.
Built properly. The pool was not built properly, and the water used to seep all around it. And actually, they found out that they couldn't maintain it anymore, that it was just going to collapse one day.
Was that Gannett Road, or was that the other side where Hoffman?
That's all in over Conant High School.
Yeah, over there.
Parcel B.
Right.
Yes.
And the pool manager is here. It was a lot of work to take care of that pool. Yes, and I think I have it mentioned here in my little notes.
For example, was one of the members. The defense back then was not really playing with the offense. And all the defense players were there, Dan Hampton and Mike Michael. And
All football players.
All the defense players, they all went with the offense. They games there.
See that? We had all the top-notch Bears players there. And that's what I do have a little mention here. It said the swim club had themed parties, cookouts, and pig roasts. During the mid-'70s, some of the Chicago Bears came out for a pig roast after the pool closed. And Matt Einecker and Larry Friday, Dave Arneson, Russ Colonna, they all tell of the great times they had entertaining the team. Walter Payton, Dan Hampton, and Gary Campbell were mentioned as some of the guys who enjoyed the parties. And, you know, and here in my notes, I did write down that the members of the Tropicana Swim Club have remained friends long after they had moved from Hoffman Estates. The stories about the pig roast parties and the 4th of July float decorating that went on all night are still recalled by the older members. So as Ed said, and I'm sure some of those children maybe are still friends to this day, but it was...
I can remember my brother's in the audience here too. When we were kids, they had a patch and a kid. A red patch meant you could not go into the deep end unless you passed the swim test. And all us kids would always be trying to pass the test because it was on your swim trunks.
Well, the picture up there sure looks like it was fun. It really does. I just remember the Lions pool that came about later, and my children would go to that pool. That was eventually did become Park District pool. All right, let's look at look at that cute kid. I wonder who that is. The youngest
I'm not going to say who.
The youngest of the oldest. There's Fred Luft with his little red wagon growing up in Hoffman Estates. And, you know, as historian, I'm telling you, these are my favorite pictures. I just love it. Out in our display cases, you'll see we have kid pictures out there because our village is made up of families. And I just love these. You know, you can look at the old cars, although they were probably brand new then, right?
Right, the car on the left there, I believe it was my dad's, and the car on the right was his sister's car, which later became my mom. I think it was a 55 Ford, I think.
We're talking about how friendly and things were. I remember when we first moved in, and I'm going back a number of years, that if you walked outside with a hammer in your hand, 4 of your neighbors came over to see what you were going to do to help. And I remember one day I was standing out. We had a carport. You know, remember the parcel C with that carports. And my neighbor said, "Why don't you just enclose that thing?" I said, "I don't know how to do that." He said, "Well, I do." And guess what? We enclosed the carport that day. But that's what the neighborhoods were all about. I mean, everybody knew everybody. You were friendly. And it was just a fantastic town to live in.
And it still is, and this is
yes.
that same feeling that, you know, when I mentioned that the early people who moved here, they were not just going to sit watching television or whatever. They were going to get out and they were going to take care of this town. They were going to govern themselves. They were going to make sure that their town became something special. And so the Homeowners Association started out the first government in Hoffman Estates. And then eventually, you know, we incorporated, and that took quite a while too. I mean, we had 3 votes in 1 year. And again, I tried to bring some of my notes with me. The incorporation of the village, oh my gosh, what a battle, back and forth.
Oh yeah, I've got notes from my dad. He was part of the Hoffman Estates Homeowners Association. I found a bunch of his typewritten notes a few years back in a box I hadn't looked at. And what happened was, it became, the people who became friends who moved into Hoffman Estates. And when it came up, do we incorporate as a village, a city, or stay unincorporated? Well, it pitted friends against friends. People did not want to incorporate or to incorporate. And like Pat said, there were a couple votes taken before the final one in September of '59. And also my dad, along with some other members of the homeowners association, they went to the village of Schaumburg Center, that's what it was called back then, and they asked Schaumburg Center, will you incorporate us as part of your town? They said no, and years later when I was asked to talk to my dad about it, and he says, well, Schaumburg only had a few hundred people back then. Hoffman Estates, like when it incorporated in 1959, there were 6,000 people. So the next election, he said, who do you think would have been voted in? People from Hoffman. And if that would have happened, this whole area would look totally different.
And you know, those 3 votes came in the same year, 1959. January the 17th, 1959 was the first vote for incorporation as a city. And there were 843 people for and 1,062 against. The new residents, they wouldn't give up on their idea of incorporation. And so another vote was taken February 20th, 1959. This vote also failed. What was needed was more information at this point. This is what the residents felt. They needed more information. You know, what does this mean when we incorporate? We're going to have more taxes. What's going to happen? And so they invited some of the people from surrounding areas. They did invite, the Homeowners Association had speakers. Milfred Egerton, he was president of Community Planning Consultants. And they had several other people. They also invited Jack Mabley, who was president of the village of Glenview. And so they had, you know, question and answer sessions. Is this something we should really do? Will this benefit us? And finally, for the 3rd time that year, on September 19th, the residents cast their votes. And the vote was 759 residents voted yes to become the village of Hoffman Estates. 569 voted no. So you see how close it was. And I know later on, Schaumburg questioned whether we were really a village. They didn't know if that was really legal. Whatever the vote count was. It was amazing, all of the back and forth and the disagreements between Schaumburg and Hoffman Estates. But we did finally become a village, and so that vote was on the 19th.
I can probably answer a question that always existed. Why was the vote, why did the incorporation defeat, was it defeated? And it was finally accepted because the people that voted no got tired of voting. And that was how it was explained, and people talked seriously about the fact that the no voters didn't go to the polls.
And you know, it's interesting because, I mean, they were really truly concerned about the taxes now that they would have to pay. Although when it was explained that you would have your own police department, you wouldn't have to have the Cook County Sheriff Police coming from who knows where if you really needed them. And you would be able to have your own fire department, and you would really truly govern yourself. But then officially on September 23rd, which is our anniversary, 1959, Hoffman Estates was officially incorporated. That vote took place on the 19th of September. And, you know, one of the things, too, when we wanted to incorporate as a city, and we're not a city, and I believe the city form of government, you had to get the approval of the nearby town, whatever the closest town was to you. And so when Schaumburg was approached, Schaumburg said no, they wouldn't approve that. So they really didn't want to have any part of us. And I think about our wonderful 27th best place in the whole United States to live. And I remember way back when we were trying to get our town started, Schaumburg told us that we would only be a slum. And that is in print in the newspapers, and I've saved that. And so what a wonderful place, truly. And now, my last person, Jane. Jane has, I don't have a picture for her. I do not. That was the end of my slideshow.
Well, my picture is the big picture.
Well,
the big picture that started in 1955.
yeah, the big picture.
I flew over this area in 1955.
Here, take the mic.
In a tiny little four-seater airplane, and took pictures of my future home, which then was just a shell, and we were all excited. We thought we're going to be living in the country, and we are moving up in the world. My husband and I moved here on the first day of May in 1956 in a rainstorm, and there were no streets. We just had mud roads, and we moved in with the mud roads, and then we're told, you're going to live with those for a year. Cook County had a ruling that any new streets had to lay empty for a year with just gravel before they could be paved. So from May of 1956 until summer of 1957, we slogged through the mud. My husband couldn't even bring the car off of Higgins Road. He parked it on Higgins Road and walked through the mud up to Higgins Road to get in the car to go to work. It was like living in the dark ages, but we thought we were high on the hog. We bought a house for $14,950 with a $95 a month mortgage, which pretty much took a quarter of our income, which they had told us, if you're going to buy a house out here, you have to prove that you make $5,000 a year. And you had to get a written consent, a letter from your employer, if you didn't make $5,000 a year, to assure the mortgage people that you were able to pay your mortgage. My husband didn't make $5,000 a year, but his boss lied for him. He said he did. And but the first year out here was absolutely like living in a mud field. They hadn't leveled the backyards yet. There were mounds that were 15, 20 feet in the air of dirt, and everybody coveted the dirt because they had scraped the farmland down to bare clay to build the homes. And so you had a clay yard with no topsoil. And then later on, they did come and level out some of those big mounds. Is anyone here from Hawthorne Street, Parcel A? No. Okay. Well, behind Hawthorne Street, between it and Higgins Road, was a mound of dirt that we called, the kids had a name for it, something mountain now, probably was a dirty name, I don't know. But our children played in this mound of dirt and then came home, and of course we stripped them outside and took off their boots and their clothes and washed them. But the men would slog up to Higgins Road with boots on, and sometimes their boots got stuck in the mud and they had to walk away from their boots. It was unbelievable, and strangely enough, I don't think any of us took pictures of those days. I don't think, even in my archives, and I must have 1 million pictures in my house somewhere, that we've got a photo of those days when we were slogging through the mud. We did finally get milk delivery from Modern Dairy, it was called. And does anyone remember Modern Dairy? Oh, okay, Modern Dairy. And they... Headlands took over Modern Dairy? Oh, I must have quit the service by then. But no, the first couple of years were really rural living. I walked over from my house to Higgins and Roselle to the farmhouse there, and you could buy jellies and jams and eggs. And if no one was home, or they were out in the fields, wherever they were, I don't know, you just walked into the kitchen and took what you needed and put your money on the table. You knew what the prices were. The jam was probably a quarter, and the eggs were probably 25 or 30 cents too. But that's where we got our jelly and our eggs for the first couple of years. If you wanted entertainment, you went to the Corner Tavern, which was across the street. The Rainbow Inn, the Rainbow Inn, the Rainbow Inn, which morphed into a kind of a nice place. And one of our previous mayors had a lovely restaurant there for a number of years. What was the name of the restaurant? It had a seagull theme. I mean a nautical theme. Was that Captain's Table? I don't. Okay.
Davey was there too.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, and there was a barber shop over on that. Yeah, and he had a big nasty dog that sat there and growled the whole time you were in there. Yeah. Well, the reason we bought this house, I need to tell you, was they were cheap. We came from Elmhurst, and Elmhurst was a lovely town and a very well-established town, and I'd grown up there, and I would have chosen to live there the rest of my life probably, and but there was no housing that we could afford, and we already had a child, and so we thought we need to find a decent house somewhere that we can afford. We went out to Meadowdale. It was kind of a dream yet. Meadowdale hadn't really developed, and but we rejected Meadowdale. We looked at 2 little houses there, and we rejected it. And, oh, I'm so glad I live in Hoffman Estates. But we came by Higgins Road, and we saw the 2 little model houses, and we thought, let's go see that. And we bought the house the first day. The very first day we walked in, we said, we'll take it. We don't care. We're going to live here. And our dear friends bought a house also. But my husband and her husband said, we're not going to live next door to each other. Because what happens if there's a falling out or even a misunderstanding or whatever? He said, so the 2 guys said, you got to put a house between you. So we did. We bought a house, and they bought the house 2 doors down, and we lived here happily for many years. We moved out of Parcel A in 1970, and we now live down the street here, just off of Hassel Road on Carling. And so I've been in this town as of May 1st this year, 60 years, most of which I've forgotten. So, but it was fun in the early years. The Boys Club was part of my first love. There were 3 families that started the Boys Club, and we went around the streets with wagons trying to sell goofy things. I don't remember what we were trying to sell, but to raise money so that we could do something with the Boys Club. The Boys Club was never successful. It was in operation a couple of years, and we had some little bit of success, but the kids just didn't come, and I think there was so many other things to do in Hoffman Estates, we didn't need a Boys Club. The kids played baseball out in the fields, and they played hockey on the, actually you could play hockey on a number of ponds in town, so there wasn't a need for a real clubhouse in those days, so the Boys Club faded away.
And I need to. I think maybe we ought to just kind of conclude, because we have some, Ken had something else to say. Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Something just crossed my mind. Because of the business I was in, I managed to have a lot of people tell me stories, okay? And it was not common knowledge that many of the salespeople that worked for Hoffman, for the F&S Construction, they were the salesmen or sales ladies. They would keep track of the houses that were purchased and so on. And as soon as someone would default on their mortgage, these salespeople would pick up the balance, because the other people walk away from it. And so the salespeople owned so many of the buildings. In fact, when I first came to Hoffman, I rented one of them on Des Street, because I didn't want to buy anything. But they were making a side living off of the reorganization, in a sense, of the ownerships. That
and I know with the veterans, the VA, you know, my home was repossessed. So I mean, there were probably, you know, people who came out and decided we're going to buy the houses, and then Even though they were affordable, they couldn't swing it. They couldn't manage it. But I know my house was repossessed in 1965, and it's Ed had talked about his too. He got his through the VA. It had been taken over by the VA. So yeah, a lot of changeover, but I wanted to just say the very beginning, when we did incorporate, giving you those dates and the fact that we did finally incorporate. Our very first election in this village was on November 7th, 1959. And that wasn't much time between, when they voted to incorporate and now they had to elect all the new officials. And November 7th, and the very first village board meeting was held on November 12th, 1959. So everybody jumped in with both feet, and here we are. And with all of the stories, I really want to thank our panel. This has really been great. And I also, yes, Ed, I wanted to recognize the fact that Jack Hoffman, who built our village, his son Ed is here. Ed?
I was wondering if anyone on your panel could relate some stories about the phone system and the electrical when you first moved in.
About the electrical and the phones when you first moved in. Oh, the party. Oh, Jane. Oh, Jane's got a good story. Jane?
I was on a party line. I don't remember now how long that lasted, but it was interesting while it lasted, I'll tell you. You were supposed to be kind and considerate and private, but everybody listened to everybody's phone calls. There was no privacy at all, and so it did kind of bind us because we all knew what everyone was doing and things sometimes that you shouldn't have known. But 16 party line to begin with, 16 people. Then it went to 8, and then it went to 4, and then you got your own phone line. And it was at least a year, maybe longer, but we had to laugh because we'd get together in these little coffee clutches and we'd talk about somebody else who we'd heard on the phone and about their life. It was Peyton Place all over again.
And the electrical, was there something unique about the electrical, Ed?
I don't remember. I was...
But the phones. I've heard the stories about the phones. Did all the lights work?
No, it wasn't electrical, Ed. It was heat. You either had gas heat, or you had to get one of those stupid tanks. Propane. Yeah. Where did the electricity come from? I don't even know where it comes from now. Why would I have known when I was 20 years old where it came from? I don't know. We had electricity, and we were on Apricot Street, which was 5 months after the first move-ins. They moved in December of 1955 on Basswood, and then moved west. So I was one of the probably almost 3/4 to the end of Parcel A moving in. There was only one more street to finish, and that was Apple. But we had electricity, but we had no streets, and we had no private telephones, and services were nil. When they finally built the Jewel, we had a massive party, but that's all we did in Parcel A was party.
It was called Citizens Utility Company.
Yes, Citizen Utility.
Is what brought in the electricity to the area.
And I think they were trying to milk everybody for as much as they could get. I think there were problems with, the cost of services and that. And the stories from back then are really, I find them very interesting. I hope that you enjoyed hearing, all of our stories from our panel. We're all still living here. Ken has moved away. Ken is not in Hoffman Estates anymore, but the rest of us are all still here. And, we hope that you'll keep coming to our programs. Ed, how I wish your dad were here. Jack, so many questions. I had told Ed Hoffman that of all the people that I have met, that I wish I could still talk to was his dad. He was a very interesting man. When you sat and talked with him, you felt that you had always known him. I mean, he made you feel as if, you were an old friend. And then, sadly, he passed away after I did meet him, and we did have a program to honor him for what he did for the village, setting up all the schools, and, the fact that he did build a village. He did not just build homes. He built the Hoffman Plaza. He built the Gulf Row Shopping Center. He built the bowling alley. He built Medcoa buildings. He built the apartment buildings that are on the south side of Higgins Road there along Grand Canyon. All of that brought in the movie theater when they added on to Gulf Rose, and they put in the Rose Arcade. So, this was his plan, and this is a plan he carried out across the United States. He built, in what other areas, Ed? He built in Arizona, in New Mexico, Pennsylvania.
Salt Lake, Denver.
Utah.
Cleveland.
We
don't talk about Cleveland.
So all over the United States, and I don't really know if and many of us who live here, really know the extent of his building across the country. And then he was also he was a very charitable man. He would help out wherever he could, and he received awards for various things, and I can't tell you all of that now. Maybe someday I will write more about him, but I do miss him. I wish he were here. Ed was very young when his father built this town, so he remembers some things, but not everything. So
we used to play pinball on the back of the Jewel Shopping Center.
Say that again, Ed.
We used to play pinball, throwing up the ball, our tennis balls up
against the back of the Jewel. Yes. And I think I remember you telling me you used to put some of the stakes in to where people the guys would know where to put in the driveways. This curbing and all of that. So he was doing that kind of work at that time. So, all right, we have... Yes.
What was the name of the water service?
Was the water from utility?
There were wells.
Yeah.
There were...
Everybody...
Yeah, I think that's, but...
That was Citizens Utility.
Citizens Utility.
And they also had electricity, but yeah, it was
and then,
a well
and then we got
system.
our own wells and...
Citizens Utility.
Yeah. That was Citizens Utilities, which they still have in a part of the lanes.
And now we have how many water towers throughout the village? Oh my gosh. And we have Lake Michigan water. So I know I threw away my water softener a long time ago. I had to bother with that for so long. We do have refreshments. We've got cake and some cookies there. And so I'm going to end this now. And thank you very much. I hope to continue this series of living history, bringing in people, and maybe in springtime, we'll see, God willing, that we will be able to have another program. Please, on your program, it does give my email. The phone number is not correct. It's the library number where I used to work. But if you can contact me on my email, I would love to see pictures that you might have. Now it's so easy to scan pictures and put them on a disc. So, and any other memorabilia that you might have would really be most welcome. Thank you so much for coming.